We pick up in the second part of our look at urbanization in cities and developing countries by addressing some of the concerns. And the first concern that comes to mind is a topic known as urban primacy. Now, as a urban system develops over time, meaning a hierarchy evolves where we have fewer big cities and we have more medium cities and lots of smaller towns and villages that help create what's known as an urban pyramid. Urban primacy suggests that this pyramid won't evolve, that the major city that's growing rapidly in the developing country will gain urban primacy, that it will overshadow the other cities and towns and villages in the country, meaning that it'll attract all of the investment, it'll attract all of the talent, it'll attract all of the people to that major city. When this occurs, the mega city or the largest city in the developing country is known as a primate city. And a primate city is deemed to be parasitic, meaning again that it attracts an over represented share of investment, natural resources, transportation and infrastructure planning and funding, and people. So a primate city gives us an imbalanced urban pyramid. And an imbalanced urban pyramid means that many of our medium sized and smaller towns, villages, and cities are not going to get the proper amount of attention, investment, and growth potential that they otherwise would. Another concern is what's known as over-urbanization. We've already stated that the pace at which these cities grow in the developing world is unprecedented. So when too many people flood into a city, we have a shortage of jobs and housing in the formal markets. In an upcoming segment, we're going to look at slums that evolve from over-urbanization. Over-urbanization, again, just means that there are too many people for the formal job and housing markets to accommodate. So these people end up falling into the informal markets. Slum housing, which is not legally owned, which is oftentimes put together with rudimentary materials or surplus materials, and jobs that are not guided by any type of safety or wage requirements. So over-urbanization could be a concern when we flood our cities with too many people. The other end of that is what's known as under-urbanization, and this occurs primarily in communist states where, as we mentioned with Shenzhen, cities are often designated to grow around certain industries, and oftentimes the population does not support the local industry. So while in a free market, industrialization is going to drive urbanization, sometimes in a controlled or communist market, we see under-urbanization occur as the government, in this case the Chinese government, might build a city for 1 million people and establish a certain perhaps defense industry in that city, but there may only be 600,000 or 700,000 people living there. So that's an issue with under-urbanization. In our megacities and in our rapidly growing large cities in the developing world, we see an increasing gap between wealth and poverty, as illustrated by Parasopolis in Sao Paulo in the opening image of part one of this discussion. And one of the measures we use is called the Gini index. Gini is named after the Italian statistician who put this index together. And what he's looking to do is illustrate the gap between equality and inequality. This image shows us the gap. If you have a number 1, that means that you have total inequality, too much difference between wealth and poverty. If you're closer to 0, that means you have more equality between the rich and the poor. And you can see here some of these Latin American cities like Sao Paulo, Rio, Buenos Aires, Bogota, Lima. They have relatively high levels of inequality, where some of our other cities like Berlin and London have market inequality, but it's not quite as drastic as what we're finding in the developing world. So as we look ahead at opportunities and challenges that are uh, facing cities in the developing world, we see again that these are locations of economic prosperity and social mobility. The reason why millions and millions of people are moving to these cities is because of opportunity. So people aren't just relocating. Even in a communist state that designates cities as growth poles, people are still going there for opportunities. In the communist state, it will be employment, it will be education, it will be family opportunities. In our free market states in the developing world, it is economic opportunity and social mobility. While what they're gaining may not be great relative to what we have in places like North America and Western Europe, what they're gaining is certainly better than what they're leaving. Otherwise, they wouldn't make those migration decisions. As we look at opportunities and challenges, again, we're going to revisit this shortly, but the growth of slums and informal economies is a major concern. But it's also an area of opportunity. Slums wouldn't exist, again, if they did not provide some type of opportunity. So when we recognize and when we analyze and when we focus on cities in the developing countries, we cannot compare them to what we're used to in North America. We cannot compare poverty to what we call poverty in North America. We have to recognize again that these are unprecedented populations, unprecedented sets of information and situations. So while the growth of slums is occurring rapidly, as we're going to find out, these are also places of economic integration into our global economy. They are certainly areas of social mobility and entrepreneurship, but they are also places of high risk. You don't have any type of protection in the workplace or at home. You don't have any type of insurance. It is a very risky situation. We've discussed this term before, cumulative causation. Growth begets growth. Cumulative causation suggests that these areas that are growing rapidly are going to do so at the expense of the other cities and the other urban areas within that urban hierarchy. This is a topic we discussed with primacy in a primate city. So cumulative causation, growth begets growth. As these cities grow, they are going to attract a disproportionate amount of investment, a disproportionate amount of the population, a disproportionate amount of foreign direct investment, meaning outside multinational corporations focusing on those cities as opposed to countrywide. So while it could be good for that city, again, it could be parasitic for the rest of the nation. And a really interesting topic that we've seen grow really since the late 1900s is this idea of micro lending. How small loans, as little as $100, could help people begin a business such as cell phone usage, internet usage, right, where it's very limited, something very different than what we have here. Certain connections to the outside world. Some of the industries that we're going to see in slums, while they're deemed informal economies, they may sell on Amazon or eBay or Etsy. So just a small loan that allows businesses to set up that online platform really looks at grassroots capitalism, really looks at pure opportunity from its lowest socioeconomic level. So the cities in our developing countries are very complex places, both when we measure with numbers how rapidly they grow into the size they reach and the trajectory of where they're going, but also that sense of place within these cities and within these communities. While from the outside, we often recognize wealth and poverty, and we can see that some of these places, like in Sao Paulo, are some of the most attractive, glamorous places on earth. But right next door, we see abject poverty. So they are complex. They are socially complex. They are economically complex. But they are where the majority of our world's population is going to be living in the next 30 or 40 years. So understanding what's happening in developing countries allows us to look back at some of the growth and some of the bumpiness along the way, in cities like Manchester, cities like London, cities like New York. It also allows us to explore this and analyze this in real time and look at both the current and future opportunities and challenges.